Hi, my name is Pastor Jeremiah. I want to say thank you so much for stopping by our website, canyonroadag.org. And I wanted to make this short video series called The Journey, the Story, and the Passion. And I just wanted to let you know a little bit about who I am and my journey and my story and what I'm passionate about as a pastor. And hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about who I am and if you make a decision and choice to be a part of this family that we call Canyon Road AG Church. I want to start off with the story. And I know a question that I get a lot of times, or sometimes people think just because I'm a pastor that I've always been a Christian, and that's not the case. Actually, my story goes like this, is that I grew up in this little tiny town called Lyons, Nebraska. And I grew up with a family that didn't know Jesus. Now, I want to make sure and preface and say my parents were not necessarily horrible people, but we didn't have any sense of God in our life. We didn't go to church, we didn't read the Bible, we didn't pray. Really, the summation of my spiritual life was going to church once a year on Christmas Eve until my grandma died, and then we didn't really have to go anymore. We called ourselves Catholic, although we didn't really participate, and we weren't really involved or a part of the Catholic Church. And that was my journey growing up. Not praying, not reading the Bible, not being taught, and not necessarily even having much of a moral compass in my life. And one of the most dramatic events in my life happened is that when I was about third or fourth grade, my parents got a divorce, and I'll never forget that day when my dad walked in frustration and anger and told my mom it was over. And that experience created such hurt and pain inside of my life as a young person. And so from that point on, I just was a confused, angry, hurt young boy, and I didn't really have a sense of direction in my life. And it really affected my grades and just so much about who I was as a kid. But it's interesting, when I got into junior high, obviously I wasn't doing good in school. I wasn't necessarily a very well-behaved boy. But it's interesting, I finally got invited to this little Assemblies of God youth group by my friend across the alley. And I remember going to that youth group, and they started talking about Jesus and this guy who loved me and died for me, and he died on the cross for me, and I need to get saved, and just all this stuff that I'd never ever heard about. I mean, I'd heard the name God, I heard the name Jesus and those kind of things, but never had anyone tell me that if I didn't have Jesus, I was going to go to hell. If I had Jesus, I could go to heaven, and just all of these thoughts that I'd never heard before. And so I started to go and hang out at this youth group, and sometimes a convention and camp and some of these kind of things. And I never really became a Christian, but yet I had this hunger for God, and I realized that there was something to what they were saying. Well, by that time I got into high school, and I was doing what every high schooler is doing. I was out partying and getting drunk on the weekends and with girls and all kinds of girlfriends and stuff like that. And I was trying to find satisfaction in that in my high school years. And just doing all this stupid stuff, and still not having purpose and not having direction and getting suspended, and just my life was messed up. But I remember what happened finally my senior year of high school. My dad had a girlfriend that was living with us at the time. I have one sister who went with my mom, and I went with my dad. But anyway, my dad had a girlfriend that was living with us at the time, and she was a backslidden Assemblies of God gal. And if you don't know what backslidden, it just means she was serving Jesus at one point in her life, but she decided and clearly was not following Jesus at that point. But we went to church together. It wasn't a Sunday morning, it was a special service. And that night I met some kids from their youth group and some other people and who would later become my wife Rachel, and they invited me over to their house after this church service. And like a good Christian should do, they began to proselytize me and ask me questions and all these kind of things. And then the next few weeks, they started witnessing to me, this small group of Christians, and they started telling me about Jesus and witnessing. And really at that point, I knew I needed Jesus, but I had a non-Christian girlfriend, I was partying, I was popular, it was just all these things I couldn't let go of, and it was driving me crazy because I knew I needed Jesus, but I just couldn't give him everything, if you know what I'm talking about, maybe if you're watching this video. And so finally, I remember in the fall of 1996, my senior year of high school, I went to this college called North Central University, which was a Bible college, and they were having a special time for college students to come and visit the college and all those kind of things. And that night they had an evening service. and I was sitting up in the top balcony, and I remember that speaker started giving kind of an altar call. And during that time, I remember hearing the voice of God for the first time in my life, and he said, Jeremiah, listen, I have a plan and a purpose for your life. I want to do things in you that you never imagined or dreamed about, but you have to make a decision to follow me. Will you give me everything tonight? And that night, I finally surrendered my life to Jesus. I said, okay, fine, I'm sick of doing it my way. And I gave my life to Jesus. And I tell you, in one moment, in one prayer, all the pain, all the hurt, the anger, the frustration, the confusion that was built up inside of my life was gone in one prayer, because that's what Jesus does. He changes people. He saves us. He sets us free. And that moment, man, I was free, and God set me free. And it's interesting because that was on a weekend, so then I had to go home, and then Monday morning at school, I broke up with my girlfriend, and I just started destroying my secular CDs I was listening to and all this kind of stuff, man, and I was just sold out for Jesus, and God started to work in my life in a powerful way. And it's interesting because a lot of people, specifically my teachers, noticed the change. I always tell this story that I was always in the counselor's office with a guy named Mr. Demon. And I was always in trouble, and he was trying to figure out how to make me better, how to make me a good kid. And none of it was working. But when I got saved, Jesus changed my life, and my decisions and my choices and my behavior changed. And all of a sudden, I didn't have to go to his office anymore. And he later wrote me a letter that said, in all of my years of being a guidance counselor, I've never seen such a radical change in the life of this young person. It must be due to this newfound religion that he found. And I never had a conversation with him to sit down and say, you know, Mr. Demon, it wasn't religion. It's that I realized I needed Jesus, and I got saved, and I got set free, and he changed my life. And so it was awesome. And God began to work in my life, and instantly I knew I had that calling. And later on that year, I would go to Bible college, and now obviously I'm in ministry to this day. And those small group of Christians, they began to teach me the Bible, and they began to teach me how to pray, and they were encouraging me, and they were there for me. And man, since that moment that I gave my life to Jesus Christ, and I said that prayer, and I put my faith and my trust in Jesus, I'm not saying I'm perfect, I've made mistakes, but my life has never been the same. That's my story. And I know my story isn't your story, but I know the story of Jesus Christ is a reality and a truth that he wants every single person to experience, and I want you to experience. That's my story.